I found myself in a place that I've never been, a place that I thought that I would never be. There's people looking back at me. I keep having this dream, I'm at a party, there's people throwing drinks and screaming, telling me that I don't belong.
Hey, I'm Patterson Hood, playing the band Drive-By Truckers, and I got to be in a movie. I got to play in The Dark Divide.
Where'd you start?
Off Highway 12, east of Rainier.
You run one of these, man.
What happened to your head?
My head? Oh, an owl sat on it.
It was a wonderful, wonderful experience getting to do that, and I'm really proud to be in such a really great movie. So the film turned out so good. So I'm gonna play y'all a song just to celebrate the movie coming out, and thank you so much for listening. Each other.
2, now.
Hi, I'm Tom Putnam. I'm the director of The Dark Divide. Thanks for joining us for this very cool live virtual event. Joining me right now are Aimee Thomas and Harvest Moon. Not only are they two of the stars of the film, but they have some pretty amazing lives outside of acting. Aimee is an activist and suicide prevention counselor who spends a lot of his time traveling around the US and Canada. And Harvest is an amazing storyteller and NEA grantee who, well, we're going to get to see her in action in just a couple of minutes. Today's also a very special day for us. Aimee, do you want to talk a little bit about what today means?
Yeah. Bonjour, Nishna, Aimee Thomas, Indigenous, Andewajin, Gazagwaska, Jamaica, Mongi, Tiko, Nitao, Jiboyam. Hello, everybody. My name is Aimee Thomas. I am an enrolled climate member from Southern Oregon, and I'm also Leech Lake Ojibwe from Northern Minnesota. And today is a very special day because today, Indigenous people, along with everyone else in the world, get to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. And that is today, this is something that I hold personally very close to my heart because Indigenous Peoples Day represents a day of reflection, a day of resiliency, and a day of existence, because no longer do we have to celebrate a holiday of which we do not believe in, of that's murder, massacre, rape, all of that, and the colonization of these lands. And it's just a huge relief off our backs to have a day for Indigenous people. And myself being an Indigenous person, it honestly means the world. Anywhere I go on social media today, I have a lot of Indigenous people that I know across the globe, and mainly in the US. And what I see is like all these beautiful pictures and all this representation of what Indigenous people really are. But it's an amazing feeling. But I just want to say a huge thank you to Tom, to Harvest for being my grandmother on the film, and in real life too. I've seen a couple of your messages, very supportive. But the movie itself honestly relates to myself and like what I do in so many different ways. That's being in the wild, being lost in there, being connected with family, and just my little scene in that movie around the fire is something where I just before when I was auditioning, what can I bring to the table and how can I relate this to myself? And it's already organically so relatable to my life. So I wouldn't say it was easy, but it was easier than it could have been for a lot of other people. But again, I just want to say thank you, Tom, for honestly helping and making this happen, because it's something that is meant to happen, and it's people connect paths for a reason, and it truly is a blessing. But with Indigenous Peoples Day, I'd like to say that one of the things that Indigenous people are struggling with is suicide. And being a certified suicide prevention peer counselor, it's not easy, but it's something that I truly love and that I'm passionate about. And this month I was supposed to be traveling across the US and Canada, but I decided to hold that off for November 1st to November 30th to travel the entire month nonstop for Native American Heritage Month. And that's my main goal, is to bring awareness of suicide prevention, but also other important Indigenous issues like the murder, missing Indigenous women and girls, the mental illness, the substance abuse, and all of that. But my main focal point is going to be suicide prevention. And we're in the process of right now converting a van. It's like a little mobile home to travel and get on the road. And yeah, that's something that's really close to my heart. So this day is super important. But with that said, Harvest, my grandmother, well, do you have a story you would like to share with us?
Oh, it's a beautiful day to be at Indigenous, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
My name is Harvest Moon. The meaning of my name is a light shining forth in the midst of darkness. So it should be pretty easy to kind of be behind that camera a little bit, and especially with the help of the director, Mr. Putnam, and Kimberly and Aimee. Oh, because I was new to this, so it was kind of interesting. But being a Native American storyteller, it's a light shining forth. And it was such a great joy to see how you work with suicide, and Kimberly works with making sure that Native Americans are perspective in a perspective way in movies, instead of how are you, it's a great new chapter for Indigenous for us now. And you can see by seeing as a storyteller, I was influenced by Mr. Laluska. And I was so taken aback when Tom and I had connected with Laluska, and I really understood how he got influenced as a filmmaker, as I was influenced as a storyteller. And I love being a part of this movie because it really gave us an interesting perspective, because I'm a cedar bark basket maker. And during that spotted owl time, I was hurting for materials, and it was a very interesting period in '93. And I just was so thankful to meet everyone. And the other perspective is I came across these. It's what I've been carrying around for over 3 decades. It's my talking stick. And oddly enough, the rattles are moth cocoons. And it's so interesting to see how I can be in a school assembly, and if the kids are getting a little loudy, just the sound of this moth cocoons brings them right down. And and I think that Indigenous and Native storytellers are much like the moths. We have to pollinate the ears, pollinate the knowledge, and let the light shine forth to let everybody shine, like in this movie. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of it.
Sure. Do you have a story for us?
Well, I have lots of stories. You don't want me to get started, do you? Well, the other part is this one book called Weaving the Dream. She is a Mabel McKay, and she speaks in this book about these exact rattles and how she uses them as her medicine for making people well. And her life and my life are very parallel. And it was so interesting when I was reading this. I read it twice a year usually. And when she speaks of the moth cocoons, gathering them near, I believe Pomo is her tribe, Northern California. And I think that's why these rattles have a little bit more thickness to them than the cocoons up here in the Pacific Northwest. But it's a beautiful sound. I love it.
Thanks, Harvest. Before we meet the real Robert Pyle and our other panelists, we're going to take a quick look behind the scenes at the making of the film and what it meant for Bob, who wrote the book that has kept me busy the last 10 years and brought all of us together today.
Hey, I'm Tom Putnam. I'm the writer and director of The Dark Divide.
I'm Bob Pyle, and The Dark Divide is based on my book, Where Bigfoot Walks, Crossing the Dark Divide.
This whole crazy process started about 8 years ago. I read Bob's book, and it takes place in a lot of the places I went hiking and fishing and camping when I was a kid. It was just such a unique look, not only at the Gifford Pinchot National Forest, but also a unique look at Bigfoot, at the challenges facing our wilderness.
Hey! Sorry, I'm lost.
And naturally, there's bad Bigfoot movies out there and people that take an exploitive or a silly look at it. Ever since the book came out, I've been careful that anybody who wanted to do something with it had an attitude that was going to be respectful to the book. It took about 5 minutes talking with this guy that I figured out, hey, he really read it, he really got it, and this could be a lot of fun.
The movie is not only based on Bob's book, Where Bigfoot Walks, Crossing the Dark Divide, it also takes bits and pieces from 7 of his other books. So we put all of those together to create a kind of a unique timeline that covers a whole bunch of periods in Bob's life over the years.
Tom had in mind at first a documentary, I believe. And now it's evolved over the years into a full-scale narrative, which means parts of it are fictionalized, parts of it are enhanced. So if I don't come across the movie exactly as I am, that's fine with me. It's probably more interesting than I actually am.
I'm glad we're friends. We went butterfly hunting together.
We did, and then, boy, you can't say too much more than that.
Nope.
Thank you. That's what I thought.
Here we go in 3, 2, have fun.
Hi, I'd like to introduce you to Scott Black, who's the Executive Director of the Xerces Society. Scott's going to be our moderator for today's panel. Scott.
Hey, Tom, thanks for having me on. We're excited to be here and very excited about the movie.
Thank you. Would you like to introduce the other panelists and we'll get going?
I'm really happy to do that. I'm very excited to be moderating a panel about nature and science and pollinators and butterflies and other insects. It's fun. My job is incredible because I get to work with incredible people like these. First, I want to introduce Robert Michael Pyle. Robert probably needs no introduction at this point. The Dark Divide is about Robert Michael Pyle. But I know Bob as a mentor, as a butterfly expert, as a person who writes incredible stories about nature. And so we're really excited to have you here today, Bob.
Thank you, Scott.
I'd like to introduce Aimee Code, and I actually know how to pronounce her first name, and we might say Aimee, but it is Aimee. And Aimee is an incredible staff person. She's the director of our pesticide program at the Xerces Society. Welcome, Aimee.
Great to be here. Thanks, Scott.
I'd like to introduce Katy Prudic, and Katy is a professor. She's got a PhD working in, she's an entomologist, but is here today representing, I'm losing it, adventure scientists who go out and work with people to both enthuse them in science, but also get important data that we can all use. So excited to hear what you have to say, Katy. And then maybe the hardest name that I will have to pronounce, which is actually much easier than I thought, is David Mizejewski. Did I do that okay, David?
You nailed it.
Excellent. And David is with the National Wildlife Federation, and National Wildlife Federation has been an incredible partner with the Xerces Society. Our missions align really, really well, and I'm excited to have you on, David.
I'm thrilled to be here and really excited to talk about pollinators.
Excellent. And we are going to talk about pollinators, and we're going to start off with all of you having a little bit to set the stage here. And then I'll hopefully be able to ask some nice questions, and we'll be able to elucidate the issue of pollinators, nature, and hopefully we'll get to what people can do to help, because there are real issues that we do need to address. So with that, Bob, take it off for us.
Hey, thank you, Scott. Such a good thing to be here with you all today. In a room of people I admire deeply. Scott Black's been director of Xerces for almost 20 years of its nearly 50-year life. And I've watched Aimee's work at Xerces with great pleasure and interest. Katy has been one of the people who has brought butterflies and other natural history, but especially butterflies, not only into all of our cognizance more and more and more, but has brought scientists and butterfly watchers together in a brilliant way. David, I haven't got to know you yet personally, but National Wildlife gave me my very first grant to work on butterfly conservation. And that was way, way back when I was a graduate student. And Xerces was very young. And a National Wildlife grant gave me an opportunity to have help. I was, I think, the only graduate student in the Yale Forestry School who had a secretary. And if I hadn't had that grant from you, Scott and I and Aimee probably wouldn't be here today.
That's fantastic.
And then I want to thank Tom Putnam for introducing us. What a thrill it's been for me to be not in this movie, but have this movie focus on a portion of my life and that of my late wife, Thea, with this extraordinary cast and extraordinary crew that made this wonderful movie. I hope you're all going to enjoy it. Then you might wonder how a movie and Xerces and butterflies and Bigfoot all come together. Well, they come together, of course, through the agency of beer. So I really want to thank Sierra Nevada also for sponsoring our event today, as well as the Xerces Society. No, but they really do come together, and they come together through a plant-animal exchange system that has a lot to do with Lepidopterus and beer and how they exchange the pleasures of the world. I just got in from the field. I was in the field for 2 days, probably my very last butterfly field trip of the year. And I tell you, this year is one of my first as well. And I was seeking a particular butterfly on a particular plant in deepest Desoton County in Southeast Washington, where the Grand Ronde River debouches into the Snake River. Well, I didn't find the butterfly yet again. I'm beginning to think that hackberry butterflies are going to be harder to find in Washington than Bigfoot itself. I really think so. But I did find some late season butterflies. And I'm here to tell you, they did something for me. They always do something for us, which may be one reason that we're trying to do something for them. So why butterflies? Well, they're pollinators, of course, but they're thought to be moderate pollinators. Some say they're not very good pollinators. I think they're better than we may have appreciated. You see a heck of a lot of pollen on those bodies, I tell you, when they come off those flowers. And some of them are obligate on certain plants, and I'm sure they're important pollinators. Certainly many moths are extraordinarily important pollinators. That's part of it. And we know, too, that butterflies are important ecological indicators. There's no doubt of that. Things go down. They go down for the butterflies. They go down for us. Monarchs are crashing in the West. Well, that probably has something to do with things that will affect us as well. So we know all that. But beyond all that, butterflies are also very good tranquilizers for individuals and for the culture. Now, we're in a time of great stress for many, many reasons, so we don't have to go over. We're not even here to talk about that today. But at a time when we're all feeling as if we could use some assistance with our hearts and our spirits and our minds and our connections with one another, certainly, and with the rest of nature besides ourselves, what could be more assuring and soothing than spending time with butterflies, just as I did a couple days ago down on the Grand Ronde River. Not very many of them, but there were the Melita crescent spots nectaring on a pale mauve aster, and I waded out into Joseph Creek to get close to some more nectar plants and watch it come swimming up right beside me, but a little baby rattlesnake, and we walked out of the water together. It was brilliant. Now, these kinds of things can give us the soothing, the succor, the care, and the loving that we need at such a time as this. The butterflies need their host plants. The caterpillars do. The adult butterflies need their nectar plants, and in exchange, they bring pollination to those plants and other services. Now, the original idea of Xerces Society 50 years ago, and we're still here, was to try to bolster this contract between insects and plants and between butterflies and the rest of nature, to keep this contract growing in a robust way. And so just as the Dark Divide movie shows us how the wild can save us, can save the heart and the mind of human beings that are undergoing great stress and great sadness, and bring us back together, can prop us up. Well, not only can the wild do that, but its specific elements can. And one of those that I hope we'll all pay more and more attention to, because of their many means of enhancing our lives and our ability to enhance theirs, are the butterflies and all the rest of their colleagues in the world of the little things that make the world work. So I'd simply say that if we want to keep a world worth living in for all of us, stresses or not, then we keep its working parts. And we do that by understanding what they are, understanding who they are, monitoring our neighborhoods and seeing what the butterflies are nectaring on. Might be some crappy little weed in the alley that we need to be sure we don't get rid of. But beyond that, if we save the habitat, save all the best habitat for Bigfoot, and we'll get the habitat for the butterflies as well.
Great.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you, Bob. That was great. I really do appreciate it. And, you know, we're not going to get into the deep science, but I agree with you on pollination. When you see a martin skipper out there full of pollen and it's visiting multiple flowers of the same kind, these animals are pollinating. They're just not pollinating our crops. And I think that's where people get mixed up there.
Right on.
So now we're going to hear a bit more about what these animals need. You know, Bob started that. Butterflies do need host plants. But I think we're going to step out beyond butterflies and talk more about pollinators and what they need, and maybe start to talk about what people can do to take some action. Aimee?
Thank you so much. And it is an honor to follow you, Bob. So thank you. I'm going to just very quickly go into our native bees and other pollinators, and then dive into the conservation actions that we can all take in order to protect them. And just like Bob said, it all begins with observation. You know, it's fall, it's true, most of our pollinators are tucked away for the winter, as are some people. But if you can take the time to get out there and observe, go out to your park, go to a meadow, and look and see what insects are visiting the flowers. You're going to be amazed at the diversity. If we're talking bees alone, the United States and Canada has 3,600 species of bees. You know, and then you add the butterflies and the moths and the beetles and the wasps and the flies that are also pollinators. You know, but the reality is all of these amazing species are in decline. They're threatened by pesticide use. They are threatened by climate change, and they're threatened by the loss of their habitat. Fortunately, because those are huge issues that are tough to tackle, but the needs of most of our pollinators are relatively simple and straightforward. So that means the solutions that we can all implement around our home and in our local area are also relatively simple and straightforward. I kind of like to think of it as a recipe because we love to cook in my family. And basically what you need a lot of flowers. You need them throughout the whole season that you're going to have those bees and other pollinators available. You want them to be native flowers. You want them to be, climate resilient. You need to avoid pesticide use. If you've got a pest problem, take a step back. What else can you do? Is there another alternative out there? And we need to have nesting area. So something that a lot of people don't realize is a lot of our native bees and pollinators, they're going to overwinter. They have a life cycle that takes a whole year. So if, our ground nesting bees represent about 70% of bees, if we disturb the soil, then we're going to possibly lose some of those bees. If we're pruning and cutting back in our yard, we're going to lose the 30% of our native bees that are going to be nesting that are tunnel nesters, that are going to be in those pithy plants, those raspberries and roses in your yard. So lots of flowers, lots of native flowers that are going to be resilient in this world. Stop using those chemicals that are going to be harmful, and make sure you leave, untouched areas where you can nest, these species can nest. And that fits in the backyard, and it fits in a farm, and it fits in a local park, but we do need some nuanced support to do that. If you're a backyard gardener and you want to do right by the pollinators, take a pledge like the Bring Back the Pollinator Pledge, and you will be walked through the steps that you need to take. And then you can be directed to the link so you can find out what are the plants in your area that are going to be most appropriate. If you're a farmer and you want to have better pollination service, and you want to have your farm be more resilient and biodiverse, look to something like Be Better Certified. You've got a framework right in front of you to help define what you need to do to better protect pollinators. Or maybe you want to do something in your community. You want your neighborhood park to be more pollinator friendly. Look to something like Bee City USA. You'll join a network of hundreds of other cities and also universities and campuses that have pledged to be more pollinator friendly and are motivated to take the steps they need to. And keep observing, like Bob said, be out there. It's so rewarding. And if you take some of these small steps, to create that recipe and give them what they need, you'll be amazed at how fast those pollinators come. It's really worth it.
Great. Thank you so much, Aimee. I like to tell people, because, people walk through nature. And when we walk through nature, I think we miss a lot, right? We might see some of the big butterflies. We might see some of the birds. But take a chair, take your favorite drink. It can be lemonade, or it can be a gin and tonic, or it could be a Sierra Nevada pale ale. And sit down and look at the flowers in your yard, in your park, and you will be amazed at the small animals that are visiting. So the next time you're out, when it's a nice, beautiful day, start that way. Well, now in the United States especially, but I think more around the world, science is under challenge. Science is under threat. People are undervaluing science. And I'm really excited to have Katy here to talk about how we can connect people better with science. Thank you, Katy, for being here.
Thanks, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited, Bob, about this upcoming movie. I was just reflecting on the first time we met, where I got to meet you and Thea when I was doing an undergraduate class in Idaho on the literature of the wilderness. It wasn't even a science class. So I want to remind our listeners here that scientists are also practitioners of humanist and artistic adventures. So sometimes poorly, as in my case, but I still try, and it's still fun. So let's talk about science. So one of the things that I do actually is I run community or citizen science programs. And I'm here today to talk about the adventure we had with Adventure Scientists, which was to sort of survey or inventory butterfly biodiversity across the West in remote locations. We know a lot more about butterflies near urban areas, and we know a lot less about more remote places in the backcountry. What are butterflies doing, and how are they responding to environmental change that is happening almost in real time right now? And so I really wanted to explain that was a fabulous program, and citizen science offers everyone an opportunity to engage with nature. So it's not a mere walkthrough, but you are actually sitting there looking for things, finding new things, and then sharing them with your friends. And I think there's lots to be said for that in terms of your emotional and mental well-being. But then there's also a lot to be said for that and how powerful that collaboration is with scientists. So this data that thousands of people have been, for fun, going out and interacting with butterflies and other animals, I'm looking at you, eBird, is really starting to help us in real time understand some drastic changes that are going on, and then give us tools to think about how to help all sorts of organisms, from plants to microbes to birds and butterflies. So these are really exciting times, and I hope that everybody here engages with community science, and that includes things like iNaturalist. The Xerces Society has been using iNaturalist to help monitor various insect species. It's a great web or phone application that anyone can join, and it gets you started with sort of embracing the natural world and learning more about it. And then there's also other programs like eBird, or the one I work with too, eButterfly, where you can go out and do checklists, which gives us even more information on the science end. And all those programs have been really important in understanding how butterflies are doing and how all animals and plants are actually doing, especially across the West. I think we just finished a paper, it's in review now, that's looking at how the Western butterflies are changing in the last 50 years and what we can expect in the future. And that was based off of citizen science data too, in addition to multiple scientists who contributed their information, like Art Shapiro. So it's a good time. I mean, so go out there, download a phone app, and come play with us. And you'll get to meet new friends and other biophilic people, and then also be looped into the science as it's happening in real time. And so it's a great place just to sort of democratize the process of science for everyone to participate in one way or another.
Great. Thank you, Katy. I so appreciate that. And I've got a definite follow-up question here after David goes. So, David, you bring years and years of conservation and education experience to this, and National Wildlife Federation, of course, works on all wildlife, right? You work on the biggest megafauna and the smallest, well, I don't know about micro, but the smaller fauna. So how should people think about pollinators? You're a large organization who's focused on all of these animals. How do these pollinators fit in, and why and how should we take action for them?
Yeah, that's a great perspective to kind of kick this off. The National Wildlife Federation, we're one of the oldest and largest conservation groups here in America. We've been around since 1936, and we do work to protect, the megafauna, the charismatic big animals. But we also do a lot of work on some of the smaller animals, and a lot of that falls under the heading of our work that we call our Garden for Wildlife movement. This is something that we've been doing since 1973. And actually, I came to the Federation 20 years ago this year. I can't believe it's been that long to actually run that program. We used to call it Backyard Habitat. And so I always tell people, when I'm speaking about this idea of gardening for wildlife, that, eagles and wolves and bears and moose and sea turtles, they're all wildlife, but monarch butterflies are wildlife. Bees are wildlife. People tend to not think of insects as wildlife, but they are. And they happen to be a group of wildlife that can particularly benefit by our choices in our own little piece of the earth, our own yards, our own garden spaces, our own communities. And so, we do a lot of work in that space alongside Xerces and others. And I just have to say too, I love being on panels like this because I love meeting and hearing from all of the folks out there that are so passionate, like myself, about conservation, about wildlife, about pollinators. And, even I haven't met most of you guys. And so I'm hearing you say all the things that I want to say too. So this, it's really great to know so many other passionate people are out there. The other thing that I think, for anybody watching and listening right now, is that there are no lack of opportunities for you to learn a little bit more about pollinators, learn a little bit more about local conservation. So many amazing programs, right? I mean, we've already mentioned a whole bunch of them just in the last 10 minutes. So there's no lack of resources and opportunities. That's what we're all here for, to help you all out there get a little bit more engaged in this beautiful world that we all share, and do a little bit more to make, again, your own little piece of the earth better, not only for all the other species that can happily coexist with us like pollinators, but for people too. And so I'll finish with my 5 tips, and I'm gonna echo what you've already heard here. 5 tips on what everybody can do right now, no matter where you live, no matter how much space you have, no matter or not if you think you're a gardener, that will actually help benefit pollinators. Number 1, that's plant native plants. So again, you've already heard this. Native plants are the plants that naturally evolved in your region. They're the plants that our wildlife species co-evolved with, particularly pollinators. And we've got tons of resources out there for you to learn what is native to your area if you're not sure. So you can Google native plant. The National Wildlife Federation has a really cool native plant finder. So you want to plant lots of blooming native plants that are going to provide nectar to the adult pollinators, bees and butterflies, but also flies and beetles and a whole bunch of other really cool critters. And for caterpillars, you want to plant their caterpillar host plant. Like the monarch butterfly, milkweed is their caterpillar host plant. So lots of resources for you to learn. Following from that, so plant native, reduce the size of your lawn. Lawns are a dead zone. Most of us have them. Most of them require lots of pesticides and chemicals to keep them green and a lot of water. Reduce that lawn, turn it into beds of native plants, and not only the pollinators, but lots of other wildlife are going to benefit. Number 3, leave your leaves. In many parts of the country right now, everyone is spending their weekend raking all the leaves away, or worse, getting the leaf blowers out. Those leaves, when they fall on the ground and form the leaf litter, are critical habitat for all sorts of animals, including pollinators. Lots of butterflies and moths overwinter in that leaf litter. And then they become food for the birds. So you want to keep that, use it as mulch in your beds, rake it to the back part of your property. Don't get rid of all your leaves. And then, of course, number 4 is don't spray pesticides, whether they're herbicides that are going to kill the native plants that the pollinators need, or insecticides that are going to kill the insect pollinators. There are many fantastic alternatives, organic gardening techniques that don't require you to use those toxic pesticides. And then lastly is get involved on the community level. Get involved in the National Wildlife Federation's Garden for Wildlife program. You can get your yard or garden space certified by us as a wildlife habitat. Aimee and Katy mentioned other great programs that do those similar kinds of things. We will certify entire communities. We've got something called the Mayor's Monarch Pledge, where community leaders are actually pledging to make their entire cities better for pollinators, focused on monarch butterfly. So no lack of ways for folks either individually or at the community level to get involved. And look, the news out there is scary. There's 1 million species on this planet endangered with extinction. Right here in North America, 1/3 of our wildlife is at increased risk of extinction in the coming decades. So it's bad news, but I don't want to leave on that scary note, because all of us have the power and the obligation to do simple things like plant a pollinator garden. And if we all do it, it really does make a difference. So I'll stop there.
Excellent. Thank you, David. I was reflecting on myself growing up. I'm the youngest of my mom had 10 kids. I'm the youngest. We really didn't have a lot of money. We lived in an urban area, but I was fortunate that about 1.5 blocks from my house, there was a square block area that had yet to be developed. And it had a little ephemeral stream, it had little woods, and it had a little meadow. And I got actually sent to the principal for bringing in baby snakes into my class. And I had terrariums in my house, and I caught fireflies by night and butterflies by day. But I had nature, right? We didn't go see big nature, right? We didn't have the money. We had way too many mouths to feed. But I had nature close to home. And I think that this is an equity issue. And I've heard Bob talk about, and I've read, of course, your books, Bob, about, nature deficit disorder and you growing up around Denver. And I just want to ask you, what are your thoughts on really being able to see that nature close to home, rather than, of course, I want Bigfoot out there, but I also want kids to be able to see nature close to home, and I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Thank you, Scott. You're so right. I'm glad you told about that little acre of yours, which is a story I keep close to my heart, having heard of it from you. For me, it was the Highline Canal outside of Aurora, Colorado. My book, The Thunder Tree, is about those special places we all have. And Richard Louv took it to the moon with his book, Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. And Rich and I have talked a lot about those kinds of places. What is less vacant to a curious kid than a vacant lot? So it's extraordinarily important to have access to a variety of species close to home. When we lose it, we suffer what I call the extinction of experience, which can bring about apathy and even more loss. But I'd like to concentrate the rest of this, not just underscoring what you said. I've got a new book out, just come out, called Nature Matrix, and it's got a chapter called Eden in a Vacant Lot, Kids and Species in the Neighborhood of Life. If we don't get the kids connected, then how are we going to expect the adults to remain connected later? I want to shift from that basic idea, which we all agree on, and which eButterfly and iNaturalist and the other things that Katy's been involved in so much, NAMI's programs at Xerces had done so much for in national wildlife. You took over from Craig Tufts, I guess, David, pretty much. Craig was my man. He was such a great backyard wildlife person for so long. But one thing that Craig and I would sit up and talk about late at night was, what are the resources that kids have close to home? And they're very seldom wilderness. And now I get to be a little bit contrarian, but you'll see that I'm not really when I come back to my conclusion in about 25 seconds. Kids don't always have access to native plants, because most of the areas that we get to be shoved up against when we're kids, if we have any at all, if we still have any freedom to roam, are going to be areas dominated by what we call weeds. Very often invasive or exotic or adventitious, whatever you want to call it, plants that have made it their business to make do in damaged, cruddy land. And it's often the cruddy land the kids get to. Fortunately, an awful lot of species, including some rarities, have adapted to use those plants too. Now, I'm all with you. I'm a life member of the Native Plant Society. I'm all for going native. But I want us to recognize it's terribly important to see what kids are using and what the butterflies and grasshoppers and others are using close to us before we get rid of those plants. We now know that monarchs' primary source of nectar on their southern migration in Washington state is purple loosestrife, one of the most reviled non-native plants. And when they migrate to California, if they make it, where do they overwinter in? The eucalyptus trees. So a lot of plants have adapted and animals have adapted for a connection between the non-native plants. Now, let's go native all we can, absolutely. But before we get rid of a particular plot of ground and the green that covers it, let's make sure that there isn't a little colony of bronze coppers or checkered skippers using that weed close to our homes. And use it ourselves until we find a suitable substitute that is native. So I want to make that specific point. We've got to save the resources we have while we're making it better. And on top of that one, I also want to say that we're not going to be able to de-lawn all the lawns. I'm all for de-lawning the lawns too, but you know what? I'm also for wilding the lawns and making them better prairies, because an awful lot of lawns are the habitat for our lawn skippers, woodland skippers where I live, tawny head skippers in Denver, sandhill skippers in Yakima, and they feed on the lawn grasses. But if they're unsprayed and if there's diversity, veronica and clover and selfie and all kinds of other things that happily come into lawns if they're allowed. So yeah, get rid of lawns, but also if people want to keep lawns, wild those lawns into a diverse prairie. That's my specific tips and my philosophy, Scott.
That's a good point. And I think we can wild lawns. I mean, I think we can, but I do think that we really do need to, I really like David's point about we don't need as much lawn as we have, right?
That's for sure. That's for sure.
There's lawn out there, and
that.
we could get rid of a lot of that lawn and still have room for baseball, soccer, and skippers.
Thanks for unpacking that. Each one of those tips can be unpacked. You can do a deep dive at it. But I actually agree with pretty much everything you said. I mean,
I figured you would.
This is a spectrum. Gardens are landscapes that we create. They don't have to be exactly like what is found in nature. But the more we can mimic that, the more we can get back to that without doing further harm to wildlife species. I think that's all of our message here.
Yeah. So thinking about what they need, I know Aimee focuses on pesticides, and the Xerces Society, Aimee staff worked on a study and looked across landscapes in California and unfortunately found that milkweed, the plant that monarchs need, is full of pesticides, full of insecticides. There wasn't a single sample. It didn't matter whether it was a wildland or a commercial farm or urban area, or especially big box store where they sold milkweed, that didn't have insecticides in it. So Aimee, going to you, what should people take away from that, and how do we deal with this pesticide issue in a positive way?
Oh boy. It was really hard to see that study. I knew that we would be finding a lot of chemicals around, and the reality is pesticides move. They don't stay where we put them, and we need to be aware of that before we make the choice to be how we manage pests, because it isn't staying right where you put it. I think on a big scale, we all need to step back away from the current system that we're looking at, the system that is heavily dependent on the use of pesticides. We really need to be rethinking. It's going to be a long time. It's systems change that we're talking about here, but we need to be thinking about more resilient farms, biodiverse farms, farms that are less reliant on chemicals because they have systems in place that are already managing for those pests. Being thoughtful about what crop you put in where, how you're managing it, so you're avoiding pesticide uses. Pesticides are probably going to be a tool in the toolbox for a really long time. We have huge agriculture out there. We have systems that are already in place. Recognizing that that is the reality we're in now, we also need to step back and take the time to be smart about mitigating risks, be thoughtful about what chemicals we just don't even want to use near some of these pollinator habitats. What practices can we take to reduce the impact of those chemicals that are being used? But hopefully, first and foremost, preventing pests, responding to them with non-chemical alternatives, and when they are in use, make sure we're really smart about minimizing their risks. Right. It's not going to be easy. It's a long haul.
Well, and I would say that the bar is different in my yard, right? I can accept some damage on my plants. I can even have a plant that just doesn't work, right? And I take it out and replace it with something that isn't eaten.
Absolutely.
I haven't used chemicals in my entire life, and people come up and look at my yard as a showcase. So I do think that you can successfully have a yard that's for your kids, for the community, and for biodiversity. And I'm going to get to both of you. I'm going to get to you, Katy, in a minute. But going to that, David, just quickly, is that something you've seen? Is that something you think that we can do in towns and cities? I just don't think that people need to use almost any of these pesticides that they do.
It's 100% possible. I mean, you yourself have done this. I've done it. There's so many people who work in conservation, and particularly on pollinators and native plants and everything. I mean, we've all been doing this for a long time. In my 20 years at the Federation, I have really seen the needle move in terms of resources for folks out there trying to learn. Again, I mentioned our native plant finder. I've got a how-to book on this. There's just a lot out there. And, we actually have seen a huge uptick in interest during the pandemic. While people are at home and they're looking for things to do, gardening in general, the idea of planting things is huge. And this idea of the connection between plants and animals, which is why a wildlife group like the National Wildlife Federation has a garden program, because the wildlife need the plants to survive. They're interrelated. So it absolutely can be done. And again, if folks are interested in this, don't be intimidated. Start small. Again, do some Googling, check out our organizations. We've got a lot of resources for you. And I guarantee you, if you plant it, they will come. I know it's a cheesy paraphrase of the Field of Dreams line, but this stuff really does work. And we've done some studies looking at it, and a native plant-based, note-based, not 100%, yard that doesn't use pesticides can support twice the amount of wildlife as the next door neighbor yard that's just a plain lawn, probably with pesticides and a few exotic plants. So it really does work, even in the city. Even if you don't have your own plot of land, there are community gardens. You can plant container gardens for pollinators on your rooftop, on your deck, on your balcony, even the little hell strip between the sidewalk. Anywhere you can plant something, you can make it good for wildlife, pollinators in particular.
Great, excellent. Yeah, and then you can watch them. And this is what I say to people. We have incredible flowers. And we've got a lot of them, and we have them season long. One of the things is having flowers from spring all the way into fall. But I invite people in and say, yes, but look what's on the flowers. Look what's around the flowers. You get both the flowers and the animals. And going to that, Katy, how do we best start encouraging even more people to take on community science? And I will say I use community science as our term that we've chosen maybe to broaden this out, because we can bring communities together. How do we best do that and ensure that they get what they need, and that they then give back both the data and the positive results? Because what I've seen is community scientists become the advocates.
Yeah, I think like anything, it's always good to listen first than to lecture. So, depending on which community you're working with, is to see how they're already engaging with the natural world, whether that's gardening, or it might be playgrounds, it might be vacant lots, it might be hikes, it might in really outside of town in more remote areas. It could be, but it is really important to sort of tailor that community science adventure to the people who you're working with. They aren't working for you. So that's always something important to remember. Now, to those ends, there's lots of different ways to do it. I think some of the most fun for me, and because I think they're fun, they tend to be more productive, have been to create or work with educators to create curriculum around community science. So to get students active learning and embracing sort of, especially the technology tools that you're seeing coming out. So they can make their own digital field guide that's tailored to their school garden or their school playground or things like that. They can learn how to graph scientific data, maybe look at the changes in phenology associated with different species and really understand, scientific concepts, but then also data literacy and data visualization and those sorts of things. So those can be really fun. I know I teach a course that uses citizen science data that is teaching people how to program. So we learn how to program in the R language. And again, so trying to produce deliverables for conservation and management, but using that data that's been generated by the community scientists. So those can be really fun ways. But again, when we develop like our eButterfly platform, it's all about our community scientists. It's like, what do they want? What will keep them coming back and enjoying the websites? And those can be things like year lists, life lists, leaderboards, more engagement with content. So more specifics about certain species and how those species are making a living. So.
All right. I've been told I need to wrap up.
Wrap it up.
Can we have a closing statement?
Well, we don't even have time for that, Bob. I've been told I need to wrap up. We're at 5. So I wish I had hours with you folks, and maybe we're going to have to do this again because I think we just scratched the surface. But please, look at the organizations that are here, see what they have, get involved. If you're at all interested in nature, if you're interested in butterflies, if you're interested in bees, if you're interested in plants, if you're interested in conservation, if you're interested in science, if you're interested in education, if you're interested in getting kids out of the house and off their videos, go do that. And definitely go watch this movie. If you want to see really the healing power of nature and really how you can find common ground, this is a great movie. And then once you do that, pick up Bob's books because you can go even much deeper than where the movie is.
Scott, thank you. And let me just say there's
Hold on, Bob, I'll give you the final word, but I have to get this plug in. It's now playing in theaters in select cities and in your living room. And so please go to darkdividefilm.com and check it out and have fun. It's an incredible movie. And it's both fun and heartwarming and sad and poignant and interesting. And so go check it out. And with that, you get the final maybe 2-3 words, but it has to be pretty quick. We got to get on.
Thank you, Scott. How could I interrupt the plug for the movie? How could I do that? Just want to say that there's no cheaper and more effective tool for getting kids out of the house and for defeating nature deficit disorder than a bug net.
I love it. Get yourself a bug net and go collect. And I do want to point out, you don't have to kill the bugs.
No, you don't have to. No.
All you got to do is collect them, look at them, and let them go. It's so much fun. So thank you all. This has been really great. I wish we had more time. And thanks Sierra Nevada Brewing Company for putting this together. and go have a beer. But if you do, make sure you do it responsibly.
So we can click, David.
All right. Thank you all. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Love you all.
So, Bob, have you ever been camping before?
Yes, of course I've been camping before.
Bob's publisher can't wait to read the first draft of his next book.
You've been talking about this for years now.
Let's dial back on you being so miserable.
I apologize, but my wife is...
Alive. I'm alive. Go look for specimens. Get away from me for a while.
I love you.
I love you more.
Am I here?
You are here.
I thought it went this way. All right, I need to go this way. Bear with me 1 second, please.
Hey, you the butterfly guy?
Well, butterfly and moths. This is north. No, this is north. Oh, where's the trail? I'm lost! Get out of the way! Hey!
How long you been on the trail?
I don't know. I guess I've lost track.
Seems ill-advised to be hiking so long without a radio or rifle. What if you run into a bear?
Why can't you see yourself as beautiful as I see you?
She thought you were a Bigfoot.
Do I look like a goddamn Bigfoot to you?
So, you're married?
I fell in love with her the second I heard her name. Thea Linnea.
Linnea, like the little twin flowers.
Yeah, of course. The only dangerous animals I've run into are your men.
Well, you've been through an awful lot these last few years. It's only going to get worse and worse until there ain't nothing left.
Next, but I'll be ready.